Buenas tardes, everyone. I am Fornesis, and today I am going to talk about class reductionism and racism, especially anti Asian racism. Because the reality is that, in terms of the current systems of white supremacy, we do tend to want to keep things simple. However, things are way more complicated than simplicity could ever do justice to. For instance, the racial caste system in the West alone requires that we have a full understanding of what racism actually entails, whether that be identity, whether that be historical rights or wrongs, whether it be reparations, etc. Ultimately, anti Asian racism is just as valid and should be seen as such in comparison to other forms of racism, such as anti black racism, anti native racism, and the like. And at the same time, these different forms of racism comprise the entire experience of white supremacy that most people of color, most racialized people in the US and in the West as a whole do experience. Because the truth of the matter is that Asia was colonized for centuries. The truth of the matter is that there is actual anti Asian racism that needs to be acknowledged, but is usually not addressed in the same ways that other forms of racism may be addressed, just because we have the assumption that due to other factors such as colorism and wealth, wealth class, we make the assumption that you know Asians in the West especially are more or less well off compared to Asians in the global South or compared to other communities of color. But at the same time, when you erase the negative experiences, when you erase the histories of anti Asian hate in the US and in the West as a whole, and when you erase the sheer fact that Asia was colonized for as long as it was, we fail the people of the past and we fail the people of today. We fail each other because ultimately we need to have this acknowledgement that anti Asian racism is real. The reason why I'm talking about this is because many recent surveys have come out, one by the Pew Research Center, and I believe that there was one that came out just either last week or a few weeks ago, that basically stated that anti-Asian hate, anti-Asian sentiment is still prevalent in American society. For instance, in the Pew Research Center poll, I believe that that was either from last year or 2023. What they stated was that most Americans who are not Asian, including you know the white community, the black community, and the Latino American community, they all more or less stated that across the board, being Asian is apparently a benefit in society, whereas Asians who were polled, you know, they stated that they experience racism on a regular basis. There is that disconnect. There is that dehumanization of Asians as the perpetual foreigner, for instance, as somebody who is inherently outside of the black versus white dynamic in the US. And as such, it could be perceived as a privilege to be Asian. And I believe that a lot of that has to do with the sheer fact that class reductionism is so popular. Um, because what class reductionism does is essentially say that, oh, well, economic class is the only indicator of whether or not somebody is privileged. And at the same time, it precludes the fact that for much of Asian American history, we were seen as a marginalized group, economically speaking as well. It really wasn't until, the 60s or the 70s when Asian Americans were seen as this wealthier class of people. But the truth of the matter is that that is only a very small snippet of history. And at the same time, my ancestors, for instance, being Filipino, they were colonized by the US directly. The reason why there's such a thing as a brain drain from the Philippines to the US and other parts of the Western world is because of this post colonial reality where Filipinos, for the most part, need to go elsewhere, need to work elsewhere, even if they're skilled, just because there aren't enough opportunities in the Philippines. And the opportunities that there are in the Philippines are mainly, you know, serving Western corporations, specifically American corporations. It's all about exploitation of Filipino labor. And when we make the assumption that just because in the US, the average Filipino American makes more money than the average white American, and thus the average Filipino American or Asian American as a whole is supposedly more privileged, that completely erases the history, the very reality that Asian Americans quite literally have always been oppressed and marginalized here in the US. And this is a discussion that we need to talk about, that we need to have, because let's face it, um, the reality is that like Asian Americans are being impacted by many of the societal trends that are going on, whether that be, you know, job cuts, layoffs, etc., from an economic perspective, all the way to anti DEI initiatives, which have cut funding to Asian American cultural, um, you know, programs and other, such programs by different institutions, whether that be, in the private sector or the public sector. And so we need to have this acknowledgement that Asian American history is important. Asian American culture is also important. But let's not, erase the negative experiences of Asian Americans in the US or in the West as a whole. Because the idea of the wealthier Asian American is relatively new. It is not the norm. It has not historically been the case that Asian Americans have been wealthy. It's not the case that Chinese people have been middle class. It is not the case that um, anyone of Filipino descent could be, seen as financially successful because, just 125 years ago, the U.S. waged the genocide against the Filipino peoples, right? They literally decimated a sixth of the population in the Philippines just 120 years ago. What the Philippines was back then is what Palestine is now. Um, and what the Lake Kivu region in the Congo is now, what the Darfur region of Sudan is now, what the Tigray region of Ethiopia is now. We have to have these historical parallels, and we have to have this understanding that race is not as simple as we try to make it out to be. Because the reality is that we are doing a disservice to each other, to ourselves, and our own histories by not fully understanding the need to actually acknowledge anti Asian racism as well as class reductionism. And so that's really all I wanted to talk about today. Um, I have no idea if this format is really gonna be, ideal. If like doing random streams throughout the day or throughout the week for this amount of time or that amount of time is really gonna like do anything, but I think I might as well try because I am currently in grad school and so I can't like dedicate 6 hours streaming every day. I was so tired after my last stream. And so I was just like, you know what? I need to try something new. I still paid for the software, etc. But yeah, I'm gonna try to do more of these, not only because it's Asian American Heritage Month, but and of course Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. But um, we, I feel like, given the state of the world, given my personal circumstances, yeah, I probably need to uh, work on streaming a little bit more, sort of like as a way to state my thoughts, almost like a diary, right? Because I like this specific topic has been bothering me all night long, and I have no idea what to do with it. All I know is that like, okay, I needed to talk about it. I needed to um say something about it, but I also needed to formulate, coherent thoughts regarding, what it means to have an understanding of anti-Asian hate as it relates to class reductionism, because I mean it just bothers me so much when white leftists especially talk about class reductionism. They basically gaslight people of color who are more towards the leftist portion of the political spectrum. They just gaslight us into believing that race is an illusion, but class is real, without realizing how racialized class is. I mean, that's just the reality. Class is not, this thing all by itself that doesn't exist. It is a very important system that we need to acknowledge. Race and class are, race and economic class are both forms of class. That's why I never say class, I just say economic class, because we need to be very clear. And to be completely honest, I want to start saying, racial class, economic class, disability class, gender class, etc. Because that makes things a lot more clear and transparent in terms of, why I believe personally the things that I believe and why I have the perspective that I have, right? And so, well, I guess I'll end this current stream here. Thank you so much for watching. Take care and have a good one. Yeah, and I'm not really sure if I should have like um done Twitch for this, but I guess I'll see. If anything, it's like a neat thing to just have in like the VODs or whatever. But this should be on YouTube, I think, if I have everything set up correctly. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. Take care and have a good one, just like I said like 60 seconds ago or something. Oh, wait. I clicked on the chat button instead of